into my eyes and show me your adventures I haven't seen. Taking all the life, it hits the spot. Walking on fantasy. So take me, baby, take me to a state of mind that's made up, baby, that's made up all that we find. Test the waters, oh, it's hot. I think we're getting close. Racing through the waves, I want to be where nobody knows. Take me, baby, take me to a state of mind that's made up, baby, that's made up all that we find. Electric, feel it in your hands. Hypnotic, watch our bodies dance. Happiness, this is where we stay. We are dreaming in the dark. We are nothing more than dust. Search but you stay lost. We are reaching for the stars, but we're making this too hard. And I wonder where you are. Mysterious, that's the
Rajendran, hello. Rajendran. കേൾക്കാമോ? Can you hear me? Yes. I was trying to talk to our resource person, Dr. Rajendran.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Sir, കേൾക്കാമോ?
Yes. വളരെ വ്യക്തമായി കേൾക്കാം. You can start whenever you are ready.
Okay, sir.
Yes. There are 167 students.
പവർ പോയിന്റ് അപ്ലോഡ് ചെയ്യണ്ടേ?
ഷെയർ ചെയ്യാമല്ലോ. ഞാൻ പവർ തന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. യു ക്യാൻ ഷെയർ.
ഓക്കെ.
ഷെയർ കോണ്ടന്റിലെ മൂന്നാമത്തെ ഐക്കൺ ആഫ്റ്റർ ദി ക്യാമറ.
കണ്ടു.
യെസ്.
ഹലോ സാർ.
യെസ്. ഹലോ.
സ്ക്രീൻ ഏത് പവർ പോയിന്റ് കാണാൻ പറ്റുമോ?
വളരെ ക്ലിയർ ആണ്. യെസ്.
പവർ പോയിന്റ് കാണുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കാണാം. കീ ഐഡിയാസ് സോഷ്യോ റിജക്ട്.
അതാണല്ലേ. ഓക്കെ.
അതെ.
ഇപ്പൊ കാണാമോ സാറേ?
സ്ട്രക്ചറലിസം.
ഓക്കെ. Shall we start?
Yes.
Good evening. Today our topic is structuralism. So let us discuss some of the important ideas of structuralism. This is the first module of our paper, literary criticism and theory. And, let us begin with the question, what is structuralism? Structuralism in literary theory started in 1960s, but originally structuralism was a movement in linguistics. As you know, it was a movement associated with the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. And he was really a key figure in contemporary literary theory, because it was Saussure who started what is now called the linguistic turn in theory. And what is linguistic turn, and what is structuralism after all? So, Saussurean theories, really revolutionized the study of language. It's a very important landmark in the history of linguistics. And he was a Swiss linguist, as I told you. And he was born in 1857 and he died in 1913. And the interesting fact about him is that he hasn't authored the book, that famous book, Course in General Linguistics. And it was compiled. He was he was a professor at the University of Geneva, where he taught Sanskrit and Indo-European languages, and he was interested in classical languages. He taught Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, and he was a scholar in Indo-European languages. And he taught at the University of Geneva. And as I told you, it was not he who, authored the book, Course in General Linguistics. And that was his most important contribution. And in fact, that book was compiled by his students from his lecture notes. And that book was published after his death. That was in 1916. So, A Course in General Linguistics. So this book, A Course in General Linguistics, was definitely a landmark in the history of linguistics and critical theory. And I told you, this book was compiled by his students, Charles Bali and Albert Sachahia, from their lecture notes. So this book was published after Saussure's death in 1960. And what are the key ideas in this book, Course in General Linguistics? So now, what is special about Saussure is that he rejected all the conventional theories of language, and he rejected the correspondence theory of language first. And what is meant by correspondence theory of language? Correspondence theory of language believed that language is a naming process. That means giving names to objects is the beauty of language. That's according to the correspondence theory of language. Language is a naming process. Giving names, it is a process of giving names to things and persons, on objects. And Saussure rejected this conventional theory of language. And he said that language is not a collection of individual units. Language is not a collection of individual units. It has a structure. Language has a structure. So this is what he said. Language is not a naming process. It has a structure. Language has a structure. And then this structure of language is organized along two poles, that is two axes. So now let us consider that in detail. An important contribution of Saussure to linguistics is his concepts langue and parole. Langue and parole. What is langue and what is parole? So this is a revolutionary idea at that time. So langue and parole. What is langue? So in a language, we need to be familiar with the rules that determine the structure of language. Such rules are finite. Finite means we can count them. So every language has a finite set of rules, and a knowledge of this set of rules is necessary for language articulation. So if you want to use language, we have to be familiar with the rules of the language, the grammar, the structure of the language. And that knowledge, that finite set of rules is called langue, according to Saussure. So langue is a finite set of rules. A finite set of rules, a countable number of rules that we have to master to use the language. The language articulation demands the knowledge of langue. And when we make a sentence using the langue, it becomes a parole. So the parole is the construction, the sentence, the construction that we can make from our knowledge or by our knowledge of langue. So that means langue is an abstract framework. Langue is an abstract framework, a finite set of rules with which we can construct infinite number of sentences. And those sentences, those articulations, those constructions themselves are called paroles. So language has these two aspects, langue and parole. So langue means the grammatical system that, in simply speaking, it is the grammatical system that governs any language, a knowledge of which is essential for language articulation. Paroles are the concrete manifestations. They are the concrete manifestations of those rules. So, as an example, take the case of the sentence, John loves Mary. So, in this sentence, a well-known example, John loves Mary. So, here, the sentence itself is an example of parole. But if we observe the sentence, we can see that it is made out of a rule. And that rule is an important sentence pattern in English language, that is subject plus verb plus object. So subject, verb, object, this word order, this pattern of sentence is the rule that makes it possible. So John loves Mary is the parole, and that a rule, subject plus verb plus object is the langue. So here, the parole is the concrete manifestation, the sentence, and subject plus verb plus object is the langue, which is abstract. a knowledge of which is essential for the construction of the sentence. So this is the first important Saussurean concept, that is lang and parole, the difference between lang and parole. So lang refers to a finite set of rules, and paroles are the infinite number of constructions in any language. I hope it's clear. And if you have doubts, feel free to ask. And now, another major Saussurean concept is his idea of the sign. So the concept of the sign, that is another important contribution of Saussure. So what is a sign? So to him, words are not actually what matters matter in language. Language is an ensemble of signs. So what is a sign? So in Saussurean terminology, the sign is a combination of two concepts, the signifier and the signified. So the sign is a combination of the signifier and the signified. According to a sign is a totality consisting of a signifier and a signified. So what is meant by the signifier? So the signifier, is, simply speaking, it is the word which can be either graphic or phonic. This can be either spoken or written. That word, that term is the signifier. So it is a psychological imprint in our mind. It is a psychological imprint on our mind. So the signifier is the term which can be either spoken or written. And then what is the signified? So here, the signified is not the thing or the object. The signified is not the thing or the object. The thing or the object that the signifier denotes. Instead, the signifier is the concept. The signifier is the signified is the concept. So the signifier is the term and the signified is the concept. And what is the difference between the object and the concept? So that means the concept, is something that exists in our mind. The object is something that exists outside us. So when we see the object, we develop some kind of an idea about that particular object in our mind. And that idea, that concept is the signified. And so the signified is not the thing or the object. So that is why I told you that this is not a naming process, as the correspondence theorists have said. So here we can see a totality consisting of the word and the concept. So that means, take the case of the tree. So when we refer to the tree as an object or a thing, it refers to the tree that stands outside us or in the courtyard, in the ground. But when we refer to the tree as a concept, it is something that exists in our mind about the tree. Got it? So that means the signifier is attached not to the object or the thing, but to the signified. So the signifier is attached to the signified, which is a concept. That means, so we sometimes take the case of the tree itself. So we all have different notions about the tree, different ideas about the tree, different attitudes and perceptions about the tree. And all those things are reflected in the concept tree. So here, the sign, according to Saussure, is a combination of the signifier and the signified. And I told you the signifier is a psychological imprint and the signified. In the PPT, there is a mistake. The second entity is signified, not signifier. The signified is a concept. The signified is a concept. Please note the correction in the PPT. The signifier is shown as concept. It is not signifier. It is signified. So in the image, you can see it clearly. So the tree as a term is a signifier, and the tree as the concept is the signified. Okay, is it clear now? And now, the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. The relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. And what does it mean? Arbitrary nature of the signifier. So the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. And what is meant by that? So there is no direct connection between the signifier and the signified. That means the relationship between the signifier and the signified is a matter of agreement, social or cultural agreement. So their relationship is not natural, but cultural and constructed. So that means the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. It is a matter of agreement, or it is part of an unwritten agreement signed by the members of a linguistic community. And that is why different languages exist in the world. So that means, so take the case of, for example, to make it clear, take an animal. And that is, this is the logic behind language. Instead, and take an animal and say, this is cat. This is cat. So I made the sound cat. This is cat. Agree? And you all agree. And so now, whenever I refer to that word cat, you have to understand that I made this animal. And this is the agreement that is behind all language. So words are attached to concepts. Signifiers are attached to concepts on the basis of an unwritten agreement signed by the members of a linguistic community. So that means if we are part of that agreement, it is quite simple for us to, or quite easy for us to understand the language. So again, take another situation. So you meet a Chinese on the way, and then he speaks to you in Chinese, and you don't know Chinese, and he doesn't know English, and he is speaking, and you are listening. And the thing is that you cannot make sense of what he is saying. Why? Because you are not part of that linguistic agreement. So here, Saussure introduced what is called the speech circuit. Speech circuit. And what is speech circuit? So imagine the conversation between two persons. So one person is speaking to another, which means here in the PPT, the C refers to the concept and S refers to the sound image. So here, the C is converted to the S. So when one man speaks, the C is converted to S or translated to S. That means concept is translated into sound image, that is language, words. And then what happens is that this is taken to the ears of the next person. And there what happens is that the S is translated into speech. So that means the speech or sound image is translated into concept, which means the two persons should be part of that linguistic agreement. These two persons should be parts of a particular linguistic agreement. Then only the second person can make sense of what the first person is saying. You got it? So in the case of the conversation between uh, uh, yourself and a Chinese man, what happens is that he is speaking, which means his concepts are being translated into the sound image, and our ear receives, receives the words also. But the thing is that the next step will not work. So that means the sound will not be translated into concepts because we are not part of that particular linguist. So that means encoding is there, but not decoding, because we don't have the software to decode that message. So in short, we can say that the language is a kind of software. It is a kind of software, and all other things. I mean, our speech organs, the lungs, the pharynx, the vocal cords, and all those things are the hardware. They belong to the hardware of speech, but language is a kind of software. It must be installed, and uh, so there should be some kind of compatibility for communication in the case of language. So this is how Saussure says that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. I hope it is clear. And now, another major contribution of Saussure is the syntagmatic and paradigmatic axis of language. A language has two axes, syntagmatic and paradigmatic axis. So in the beginning, I told you that language has a system. Language is a system, and that system works on two axes. They are syntagmatic and paradigmatic axis of language. And what is meant by syntagmatic and paradigmatic axis of language? So here, syntagmatic axis of language refers to the horizontal arrangement of words in a sentence. So words are horizontally arranged in a sentence according to the rules of the language, or grammar rules of the language. So that horizontal arrangement of words in a sentence can be said as syntagmatic. And then what is paradigmatic? Paradigmatic refers to the vertical arrangement of items, the vertical order of items from which one can be substituted for another. One can be substituted for another because they are paradigms. And so these are the two axes of language, the horizontal syntagmatic axis of combination and the vertical paradigmatic axis of selection. That means, so when we utter a particular sentence, when we make a sentence, first our mind makes a selection of items to be spoken from a list of possible items. And those items exist in our mind. So when we make a construction, when we make a sentence, we make a selection. we make a selection of items to be spoken from a list of possible items. That invisible list of possible items in our mind, that depends on our linguistic capability, is referred to as the paradigmatic access, which is invisible, which is not accessible to the third party or another person. It is there in your mind. And when you say a particular sentence, you make a selection. You make a selection of items to be spoken from a list of possible items in your mind. And once this selection is over, the next step is to combine them according to the rules of grammar along a horizontal syntagmatic axis. So I shall make it clear with an example. So here, take the sentence, the child cried. So the three items are there. The definite article is there. The. Then child, cried. Three items are there. So that means three items are arranged along a horizontal line. The child cried. Three axes, three words or three items are arranged in a horizontal axis. And that is the syntagmatic axis. And see, the child can be substituted by a lot of words. We can use the word infant, baby, boy, or girl. But here, we use the word the child, which means we selected that word from a list of possible items that we already know. So we selected that item child from a list of possible items that we already know. And so that means that list of items in which one can stand for another can be referred to as the paradigmatic axis of language. So the first process is the selection of items from a list of possible items. And in the same way, cried. The cried can also be substituted with a lot of other words in the plain language. But we selected that word cried. So here, thus, when we make a construction, when we make a sentence, we make a selection and a combination. We select items to be spoken from a list of possible items, and then we combine them according to the rules of the grammar. So here, the child cried. The definite article precedes the noun, and the noun in turn is followed by the verb, which is the word order of English language, the right order of English language. So here, so these are the two axes of language, the axis of selection and the axis of combination. The axis of selection is the vertical paradigmatic axis, and the axis of combination is the horizontal syntagmatic axis. You got it? So the selection is done, then combination is done. So this is this is how language is structured. Language is structured along two axes: the paradigmatic vertical axis and the syntagmatic horizontal axis. I hope it's clear. And now, so here, so these are the major contributions of Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure. And I told you, these are all, innovative, these were all innovative ideas in linguistics at that time. So he revolutionized the study of language. And now, but in the 1960s, 50s and 60s, structuralism began to influence literary theory. Structuralism began to influence literary theory, and that was in 1950s, 50s and 60s. And now, what are the implications of structuralism in literary theory? So no, before that, let us, some of the important assumptions of Saussurian theory, Saussurian concepts. First, he said that meaning is arbitrary. So what is meant, and this has its own implications in literary theory. Meaning is arbitrary. So what is meant by that? Meaning is arbitrary. So that means it is not fixed. Meaning is not fixed. It is arbitrary. It is a matter of agreement. So that means meaning is, not something natural, a fixity. It is not a fixed entity. It is arbitrary. It is a matter of, general consensus. So it is arbitrary. And another thing is meaning is relational. Relational means meaning is a matter of difference. It is relational. So that means individual items are not meaningful. Individual items acquire meaning when they are embedded in a particular context, because it is a context that determines its meaning. So individual items as such are meaningless. But when they become part of a system, they become suddenly meaningful. So that is why he said that meaning is relational. And so he used a very, popular example, a famous example, 825 Paris Geneva Express. So 825 Paris Geneva Express. So what is meant by that name? 825 Paris Geneva. That's the name of a train. 825 Paris Geneva Express. It's a name of a train. And now, suppose that train is running late by 1 hour. Now the train is running late by 1 hour. And now what should we call it? Now what should we call it? What should we call that name now? Because it is now running late by 1 hour. Can we name it as 925 Paris Geneva Express? Never. We can say 825 Paris Geneva Express is now running late by 1 hour. Why? Because it is that term, 825 Paris Geneva Express is something that differentiates the train from other trains in the schedule in the railway timetable. So that means it acquires its meaning only in relation to other trains in the list. So 825 Paris Geneva Express acquires its meaning, or it becomes meaningful, when it is actually placed in that context of the railway schedule. So that is why it said that meaning is relational. And another thing is that language constitutes our world. Oh, what's meant by that? Language constitutes our world. So our world, so what we consider as our world, which is actually populated by our ideas, our perceptions, and our viewpoints, is something that is constituted by language. So what, in fact, what we are is constituted by our language. Suppose if we were born in any other country, any other linguistic community, our thought would have been completely different. If we were born in any other linguistic community, if we were born in, Africa, or if we were born in Australia, or in any other country, in any other linguistic community, our thoughts would have been different, because our world, what we perceive as our world, is something constituted by our language. So language constitutes our world. So there's an interesting example. It was told by our former Chief Secretary, the great D. Babu Paul. Once he said that, once he said this in example, so it was in 1960s, or yes, in 1960s, a mass agitation was launched in Trivandrum in connection with some other political event. And they, it was actually launched by, I think, the CPM, the Communist Party of India, and they, placed the posters on the walls in the city. Secretariat Valayinu, Secretariat Valayinu, CPM. Valaya means surrounding. And so this poster was actually fixed in the city, I mean, on the walls of the Secretariat. And one day, the PWD secretary, and he was, I think, Uppiriyappan Swami, he was the PWD secretary at that day. And on his way to the Secretariat, he saw this poster, Secretariat Valayinu, CP. And back in his office, instantly he summoned the chief engineer of the PWD and told him that Secretariat Valayinu, കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റുകാർ കണ്ടുപിടിച്ചതാണ് സെക്രട്ടേറിയറ്റ് വളയുന്നു. അതായത് 150 വർഷം പഴക്കമുള്ള സ്ട്രക്ചറാണ്. ഇതിന്റെ ഏത് ഭാഗമാണ് വളയുന്നതെന്ന് പോയി നോക്കി കണ്ടുപിടിച്ചിട്ട് വരാനായിട്ട് പറയും. What happens is that to the politician, the word valayuka has a particular meaning. But to the engineer, it has another meaning. So in fact, it is language that constitutes our world. So here, as we have said, meaning is arbitrary, meaning is relational, language constitutes our world. And now, in short, we can say that structuralism, when applied to literary theory, does not study meaning, the conditions of meaning. It studies not meaning, but the conditions of meaning. That means we need the help of a linguist. We need the help of a linguist. What? Not to decipher the meaning of the word, but to explain how that word works, or how that word assumes a particular meaning. So the linguist explains the conditions of meaning. We don't need the help of a linguist to understand the meaning of a sentence. We need him to explain, to describe the conditions of meaning. So in the same way, structuralism as a literary theory does not study the meaning of, is not concerned about the meaning of a literary text. Instead, as a theory, it is concerned with the conditions of meaning, how meaning is generated, how meaning is created, and that is what structuralism studies in here. So we have now, I hope it is clear. I mean, our discussion on Saussure. So the important concepts associated with him are Lang and Parole, then the sign, the concept of the sign as a combination of the signifier and the signified, then the two axes of language, syntagmatic and paradigmatic axis of language. Now, the assumptions of structuralism as a theory. And now, as I told you, structuralism studies not meaning, but the conditions of meaning. And now, this, importance of structural linguistics in theory gain momentum with the theories of a great anthropologist of the 20th century, that was Claude Levi-Strauss. Claude Levi-Strauss. And he was a French anthropologist. Claude Levi-Strauss. He was a French anthropologist. And what is special about him is that he applied the Saussurean linguistics. He applied Saussurean linguistics, the concepts of Saussurean linguistics, to the study of anthropological data, ethnographic data. So he applied Saussurean theories to the study of anthropological data. So we can say that it was Claude Levi-Strauss who first introduced structuralism in cultural theory. Structuralism in cultural theory. He introduced a Saussurean model in his analysis of ethnographic materials. He was a French anthropologist and he was born in 1908 and he died in 2019, just a few days before his 101st birthday. And he was, a very important figure in contemporary literary or cultural theory. And because he introduced the Saussurean methodology in the analysis of anthropological data. And, he was, as I told you, an anthropologist, a structural anthropologist. And he spent almost 21 years among the Amerindians, American natives, Amerindians, studying their culture, studying their myths. And the myths are the primary data of the anthropologist. So he spent almost 21 years among them, studying their culture and studying their, ethnic nature and the like. And he belonged to what is called the School of Paris. I know. As I told you, he applied the methodology of Saussurean linguistics in his analysis of anthropological or ethnographic data. I know. What are the ideas introduced by Levi-Strauss? According to Levi-Strauss, culture in all its aspects is a language. Culture is a kind of language. So that means culture has a lang and parole. Culture is a kind of language. Culture works in the domain of the symbols. Culture works in the domain of the symbols, and language too works in the domain of the symbols. Language is also, a mass of symbols. And in the same way, culture is also a kind of language. And now, anthropology is a study of human culture and society. And Saussure said that, Levi-Strauss said that if we consider the society, the human society, as a parole, what is its land? If we can consider the society, the human society, as a parole, what is its land? If the society is a parole, what is its land? And here he said that incest prohibition is the lang of the society. Incest prohibition is the lang of the society. Because it is the incest prohibition that works as the lang of the society, which means the parole society, the society is made possible through incest prohibition. The society is made possible through incest prohibition. It is based the human society, modern human society is based on incest prohibition. In that sense, if the society is a parole, its land is the incest prohibition. How? How? What is the fundamental unit of the society? So, what is the fundamental unit of the society? You know, the fundamental unit of the society is the family. And what made the family possible? What made it possible? What made the family possible? Say, what is a family? In a family, there must be a father, a mother, and their children. Father, mother, and children. A son or daughter. Okay. And what happens is that this structure is supported by incest prohibition. This structure of the family is supported by incest prohibition. It is the incest prohibition that enables a particular person to remain as the father of the house and another person to remain as the mother of the house and another as the son or daughter of the. Without incest provision, there would not have been such subjective positions. There would not have been father, mother, son, or daughter. And one is able to remain as the father because of incest provision. And again, one is able to remain as the mother because of the same incest prohibition. Without incest prohibition, there would not have been family. And without family, there would not have been a society. So this is how incest prohibition works as the land of the society. Okay, now, so incest is prohibited inside the family. So remember, it's only the human species who prohibited incest. And it's only the human species who live in organized societies. I mean, societies like the one in which we live in. So only human species prohibited incest. And only human species live in organized societies like ours. You got it? So, incest is prohibited in the family, which means the only allowable, permissible physical consummation inside the family is between the father and the mother. No other physical sexual consummation is permitted within the family. This is prohibited. And because of this prohibition, they invented the institution of marriage, the system of marriage. It is because of this prohibition they invented the system of marriage. And what happens is that a girl in the family cannot marry her father. And then what happens is that the girl is sent to another family in a matrimonial relationship. Girl is sent to another family in a matrimonial relationship. So naturally, there is a connection between two families now. They are connected with a matrimonial alliance. So that means a girl is sent to another family. If there is another girl in the second family, she will be sent to yet another family, a third family. And now there is a link between three families. And if there is another girl in the or boy in the third family, he will actually take a girl from another family. So the link will expand. So thus, soon they form a cluster of families. a cluster of families connected through matrimonial alliances. So this is how the first clan developed. The first clan developed in society. So in short, we can say that the contemporary human society evolved through the exchange of girls. The contemporary human society evolved through the exchange of girls. And so this is how the human society developed. And so each family, each society has its own marriage rules. And um, uh, uh, the entire Brahmin community is divided into gotras. Gotras, different gotras are there, and each gotra is named after a sage, after a Maharishi. Vasishta Gotra is there, Gautama Gotra, Bharadwaja Gotra, different gotras are there. And a boy in one particular gotra cannot marry a girl belonging to the same gotra, and he can marry a girl belonging to another gotra. Got it? Because the members of a particular gotra are supposed to be the descendants of a particular ancestor. And so the boy cannot marry a girl belonging to the same gotra, and in North India it is called Sagotra Vivaham. Sagotra Vivaham is not permissible, and there were so many violent instances in many parts of India with in relation to or with regard to this kind of Sagotra Vivaha that is prohibited. And so here the point is that every society has its own marriage rules. And these marriage rules function as the lang of the society. And all sorts of relationships within the particular society are the, actualizations of the rules inherent in the society, or rules circulated in the society, or they are the paroles of the lang that exists in the society. So every society has its own ideas about who can marry whom. And so all such rules function as the lang of the society. And that's why Levi-Strauss said that the incest prohibition is the lang of the society. If the human society can be considered as a parole, its lang is incest prohibition. So we can see this logic everywhere. So, for example, take the case of a football match or a cricket match. So what we watch as the game is the parole. And behind that match, there are rules. And it is the rules that enable a particular person to score a point in the game. So the player, gets 6 runs or something like that, and it is possible because of a particular rule that exists in the game. So that means the game as we watch is the parole, and the rules that govern that validate each move within the game is the lang. So here, this is how Levi-Strauss applied Saussurian methodology to the analysis of anthropological data. And so here he said that the myth is a form of language. And then incest is bad grammar also. Incest is bad grammar also. I shall make it clear soon. Now, to illustrate his theory of myths, we shall consider 2 myths first. In his essay, Incest and Myths, Levi-Strauss talked about an Amerindian myth, an Amerindian myth. And so here, the myth is that a brother and sister, this is a myth, an Amerindian myth. A brother and sister were staying in a house. No others in the house, they were staying there. One night, the girl was molested by a nocturnal visitor. Nocturnal visitor means a visitor at night. So the girl was seduced by a nocturnal visitor. And she struggled hard, but the man overpowered her. But she could not identify the person. It was pitch dark and she could not identify the person. And in the morning, she thought that it was her brother who molested her last night. It was her brother who seduced her last night. And moreover, she saw a scratch on his face. So she quarreled with her brother, and then the brother told her that it was not he who had molested her. He was innocent. But the girl refused to believe him. And to escape from that kind of an accusation, he revealed to her a secret related to his birth. He told her that he had a double. Almost like a twin brother, a double. And the destinies of these two persons were so closely linked to each other that anything happened to one would automatically transmit to the other. And still the girl was incredulous. She refused to believe this story also. And finally, to convince his sister that he was innocent, he brought his double before her. And both of them looked exactly alike. He brought his double before her. And in a fit of rage, the young man killed his double. And what does it mean? He too would perish. But there should be a cause for that. And instantly, the cause arrived there. So why? His mother, the mother of the dead double, was a sorceress. And she was called the mistress of the owls. There were owls on her shoulder, a witch, a sorceress. And she appeared there. And there, then the boy was sure that he would be killed by the witch. So he played a final trick to escape from the wrath of the old woman. He told her a lie. He told her that he was her son, and the dead was the girl's brother. The deceased was the girl's brother. He told this lie. And then, to convince the witch that he was her son and not the girl's brother, he married his sister in front of her. he married his sister in front of her. And incest was so inconceivable that the old woman did not suspect the trick. And thus the boy escaped from the wrath of the old woman, the wrath of the witch. This is a myth. But this myth has another version also. In another version of the myth, it is said that he was able to fool the old woman, but the owls could not be fooled. And an owl asked a riddle to the boy, and he was able to solve the riddle. And what happened is that he escaped from the wrath of the old woman. So here, what happens? So what is special about this story is that the very measures taken to avoid incest finally lead the protagonist to incest. So he married his sister, and so thus he really committed incest. So the very measures taken to avoid incest leads the protagonist to incest. And now let us look at another myth. That is the Oedipus myth. And hope you are all, aware of you are all familiar with the Oedipus myth. And Oedipus was born as the son of Laius and Jocasta, the king and queen of Thebes. Laius and Jocasta. When the boy was born, an oracle, oracles are, they are with prophetic power. An oracle told the king that the child would grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. So they were terrified. So they decided to abandon the child. So that baby was entrusted with some soldiers and they were asked to kill him at the forest. And they took the boy to the forest, but they did not actually kill the boy. Instead, they made a wound on his leg with the tip of their sword, and the boy was abandoned there. And then the boy was rescued by a shepherd, and he in turn gave the child to another shepherd, and that shepherd gave the child to the king and queen of Corinth, and they were childless. King and queen of Corinth, they were childless, and then Oedipus was brought up there as the son of the king and queen of Corinth. And he was under the impression that they were his real parents. And years passed when he became a youth. And then what happened was that one day an oracle met him and told him that in future, he would kill his father and marry his mother. He was terrified. So to escape from that unfortunate situation, he fled from the place. Oedipus left the place without saying a word to anyone. And he left the place. He wandered a lot. And finally, he reached the junction. During his wanderings, he reached the junction, a narrow road. And then there broke out a quarrel between Oedipus and an old man about who to cross the road first. And at the end of the quarrel, Oedipus, in a fit of rage, killed the old man. And then he continued his journey. And he reached the Thebes. And at that time, Thebes was haunted by a monster called the Sphinx. A monster with a lion's body and a woman's head. And she was sitting by the side of a bridge, and she would ask a riddle to the passersby. The riddle is, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the noon, and 3 in the evening? That is her riddle. And Oedipus was very wise and intelligent, and he was able to solve the riddle. And the condition is that if anybody solved the riddle, she would actually leave the country. I mean, the curse of the monster would be lifted. Oedipus was able to solve the riddle because he saved the country from the clutches of the monster. And then the country was now ruled by the widowed queen, and she expressed her readiness to marry the young, wise, intelligent man. And they got married. And as years passed, he gave birth to two boys and two girls, including Antiochus and Antigone. Ethiocles and Antigone. Ethiocles and Antigone. And then, after a few years, a terrible drought broke out in the land. And the country suffered much under the famine. And finally, he consulted the oracle, and the oracle told him to consult the Theban prophet Tiresias, the protagonist of the wasteland. And Tiresias was summoned, and he asked Tiresias the reason for the drought. And at once Tiresias understood the situation, but he simply said, someone in this country had committed patricide and incest. That is why this curse fell upon the land. And as a result, and the land turned into a sterile, barren land. So now Oedipus ordered a detailed inquiry in the investigation into the matter. And at the end of the investigation, it turned out that he himself was the culprit. The old man whom he killed on the way was none other than his own father, Laius. And the woman whom he married now is mother, Jocasta. So this was a terrible revelation to Oedipus. Instantly, he blinded himself and he left the palace. Why did he blind himself? Because the one who saw everything did not see what he should see. And so he blinded his physical eyes and he left the place and he died in a grove sacred to the goddess of Oedipus. So this is a story of Oedipus. Now look at the two stories. In the first story, the brother kills his double. And he solves the riddle, marries his sister. And there is a patch on his face. In the same way, Oedipus kills Laius, his father. And Oedipus solves the Sphinx riddle. And then Oedipus marries his mother. And there's a scar on and a deformity on his leg. See? How these stories are, similar in structure. How these stories are similar in structure. Why? What is the reason for this kind of a similarity? So, these stories belong to two different cultures. One is the Amerindian culture, that is from the American continent, and the second is a European myth. And again, we can add an Indian story to this also. What is that story? So though there is no incest, the story of Parai Petta Pandirugula is, relevant here. But the first column is blank because in the story there is no murder or killing of anybody. And I hope you are familiar with the story. And so that story perfectly fits in here. And you know the story of Varuji. Varuji is a Mahabrahmin, and he was asked by the king to find out the best sloka in Ramayana. And during his wanderings, he fell asleep under a tree, and then he overheard a conversation between two yakshis. And in their conversation, they said that a girl was born in a family there, a Paraya family there. That is a scheduled caste family there. And they said that the Brahmin sleeping under the tree would marry that girl. And then in the morning, to escape from that unfortunate situation, Varuji rushed to the palace and told the king that a girl was born to destroy the country, an ill omen to the country. And the soldiers were sent. They took the girl, but they did not kill the child. They abandoned the child in a small raft. And then the raft was actually um, uh, owned by a Brahmin, taking another Brahmin, taking a ceremonial dip in the evening in the river. And he saved the child. He brought the child to his family, and the girl was brought up there as the daughter of it. And years passed, Varuji came there, and then he opposed the rebel to the Brahmin. And the girl was able to solve the riddle, and thus he was impressed, and he married the girl. And then they set out their journey. And on the journey, when he touched her head, he understood that it was that girl whom they abandoned in the river. And then they resumed their life, and 12 children were born to them, and they were, and all except one were abandoned on there. And all the 11 children were adopted by 11 social groups in our society. Okay, so that story perfectly fits here. There is also a solving of the riddle, then a marriage between an inconceivable marriage between two persons, then a scar, and so that story also fits here. So the thing is that if we take the Indian story too, we can say that these three stories belong to three different geographical locations. Then why? Why they are related to one another? So it is here that Levi-Strauss says that they are the paroles of the same land. They are the paroles of the same land. So in language, the same land can create a lot of paroles. So for example, take the case of the land, subject plus verb plus object. Infinite number of constructions can be made using that pattern. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, the boys played football, she played piano. All these are possible sentences made out of that particular structure. In the same way, and all those sentences are structurally same. And the same time, in the same way, these myths belonging to three different geographical locations, three different continents, I would say, are alike because they are the paroles of the same land. And again, I told you that incest is bad grammar. How incest is bad grammar? See, take the case of Antigone or any child born out of an incestuous union. What is the relationship between Oedipus and Eteocles? Is Oedipus his brother or father? Is Jocasta the mother of Eteocles or the grandmother of Eteocles? So here we can see that all the subjective positions offered by the society collapse here. Because an incestuous child is a grammar mistake. It cannot be accounted in the existing social equations. An incestuous child cannot be accounted in any existing social formulas. That is why he said that incest is bad grammar. Incest is bad grammar. So this is how Levi-Strauss applied Saussurean methodology in the analysis of anthropological data. And now, I hope this is clear. So Levi-Strauss applied Saussurean methodology in his analysis of anthropological data, and he said that culture in all its aspects can be studied like language. So, like the rules of grammar, a lot of rules are there in the society, unwritten rules of the society, and those rules determine our subjective positions and roles in the society. Okay. Now, another implication of this Saussurean linguistics is in criticism, in literary theory, that is in the writings of Roland Barthes, the structuralist Roland Barthes. And Barthes and his career, there are two phases in his career. In the first phase, he was a structuralist. But in the second phase, we can see him as a post-structuralist. That we shall see in another class. And Roland Barthes also followed the footsteps of Levi-Strauss. And Barthes applied Saussurean theory to mythology. So this is how Barthes, formulated his theory of myths. So here, look at the algorithm here. The sign. The first is the Saussurean algorithm. The sign is signifier by signified, and this signifier is the sound image and signifier is the concept, and sign is the totality comprising both. The second algorithm is Barthian algorithm. That is, sign is signifier by signified. What is the difference here? Sometimes you may say that the first one is in capital, so small letters, and in the second one, capital. Yes, of course, there is a difference. There is a difference between the two. So take the case of a myth. What is the logic of a myth? What is the logic of a myth? So Barthes said that myth is a language. Myth can be studied like a language. So myth is a language. This is Barthes' notion. Myth is a language. This is what Barthes said. Myth is a language. It is a second order language. It's a language. I know. So what is the structure of a myth? If we analyze a myth, We can say that. We can see that 70 or 75% of the myths are facts, but the remaining 25 are fantasy. The remaining 25% is fantasy. So this is how facts are fantasy. Facts and fantasies are combined to form the myth. So myth is a combination of facts plus fantasy. More than 70 or 75% of facts and 25% of fantasy. Take the case of Oedipus myth. We just discussed Oedipus myth. So Oedipus was born, that is quite natural. Abandoned, again natural. And then saved by shepherds, quite natural. Then brought up by the king and queen of Corinth, again natural. And he left the place. All these things are natural. They are factual. Nothing exaggerated about all these things. But fantasy sets in the story with the arrival of things. That is the element of fantasy in the story. That's the element of fantasy. So here, everything inside the story except the Sphinx and the riddle are realistic and natural to the core. Yes, realistic and natural to them. But the element of fantasy comes in with the arrival of the Sphinx. See, you know, human beings have a liking for stories. We like to tell stories, and also we like to hear stories. We like to tell stories and we like to hear stories. And if the story carries some elements of fantasy, it will be quite interesting. So it will be a very a pleasurable activity to tell the story to somebody and see him interested in our narration. So this is part of human nature. And so that means a message has to be conveyed to the people in the society. That is, in the past, a message has to be conveyed to the people in the society. And in the past, there were no social media or conventional media or mass media or something like that. And a message cannot be sent to the entire people, the entire, population of a particular country. In that case, the message is circulated in the form of myths. This is how myths were invented. They were circulated in the form of myths. Facts are there, and the facts are mixed with elements of fantasy, and the elements of fantasy make them very much interesting. So people will actually tell the story to others. So when a person hears, for example, Oedipus story, he is very much interested, and naturally he will tell the story to 10 more people. And those 10 people would tell the same story to 100 people. That means within no time, the story will be circulated within the society. But the story will be circulated within the society. And so this story is the myth. And the myth, is a kind of language, which means the story itself is a language. Not the language in which the story is circulated, but the story itself is a language. And as a language, the story has a meaning to convey. So that means in the first part of the algorithm, sign is signifier by signified. So what is special here is that the story is narrated in a language. and that language has a meaning too. And that is the first part of the algorithm. That is the socio part. The story as words and sentences and the meaning of the story. And that is the first part of the algorithm. Then Barth says that the entire story, that is the entire Saussurean algorithm, becomes the signifier in the second algorithm, that is a capitalized signifier, and its signified lies elsewhere. So this is Barthian theory. So the entire story, that is as words, sentences, and dialogues, and their meaning, become only a signifier in the second algorithm, and its signified is something else. Got the point? It's somewhat, complicated indeed. So the thing is that the story of Oedipus itself is a signifier. Its signifier is something else. Take an example. And what is the signified there in the case of Oedipus story? That is, incest must be avoided. Incest must be avoided. Incest, brings in catastrophic situations, and that is why, that is the meaning, the significance of the story. But this cannot be explicitly sent to the people and as a the entire people as a message. And for that, they invented the story of Oedipus. So that means the entire story becomes a signifier in the second algorithm, and the signified is something else. Which means the signified is the message it carries. So this is how Barth says that language or the myth is a form of language, and it has a signified fire and signified also. The entire story is a signifier, and its message is it signified according to Barth. So this is how Barth, introduced structuralism, Saussurean linguist structuralism in his study of myths. And then another contribution of Barth is his work S bar Z. S, letter S / Z. S bar Z. And that is also an important work in his structuralist phase, S bar Z. And this work is a structuralist analysis of Balzac. Balzac was a 19th century novelist. Balzac's story, Saracen, Sarrasine. Saracen. Saracen was a story by Balzac. And Esbarzet is Barth's book on, a structuralist analysis on Balzac's Saracen. So here, Barth identified 5 different chords in the story. So the story is that Saracen was a sculptor, a French sculptor. Saracen was a French sculptor. And one day he visited Italy. And in Italy, he happened to watch a play. And the heroine of the play was a very beautiful girl, an extremely beautiful girl. And he fell in love with that girl. A strong infatuation. He fell in love with that girl. He wanted to marry her. He wanted to possess her. And then he made a beautiful statue of that girl and spent his time in front of the statue. But the problem is that it was not a girl. The person whom he saw on the stage was not a girl. It was a boy, a teenage boy dressed as a girl. Because in Italy, girls were not permitted to act on the stage. And Saracen was unaware of that. And so he failed to make meaning there. He failed to make meaning there in Italy. And later, when he came to know that it was not a girl, it was a boy, he was, even at that time, he was not ready to abandon his infatuation. He said, no, okay, even if it was a boy, he wanted him. But the boy happened to be the page of a cardinal. And when the cardinal came to know about Saracen's obsession for the boy, obsession with the boy, he ordered his men to arrest him. And finally, Saracen was arrested and beheaded under the orders of the cardinal. And this is a tragedy of Saracen. And here, what caused the tragedy is that he failed to make meaning. He was not, because he was not aware of the conditions of meaning there. And in the analysis of this story, Roland Barthes identified 5 chords. Prioritic chord, P-R-O-A-E-R-E-T-T-I-C, prioritic chord. The chord related to action, prioritic chord. Then hermeneutic chord, hermeneutic chord, hermeneutic chord. The chord related to the enigmas in the story, enigmas in the story. Then semic chord, the chord related to characters, semichord related to the characters in the story. Then cultural chord related to culture. And the last is the symbolic chord, which is related to language. So he identified these 5 chords in the analysis of Saracen. That is S. Barsad, that famous book by Barthes. So this is how structuralism theory works. And now we shall have a small discussion on the topic, and if you have any doubts, you can ask. Okay.
എല്ലാരെയും അൺമ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുകയാണ്. മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുക, എന്നിട്ട് സംശയമുള്ളവർ മാത്രം
ജീവകം എന്നറിയപ്പെടുന്നു.
ഹലോ, ഞാൻ എല്ലാരെയും അൺമ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യാം. നിങ്ങൾ തന്നെ മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ട് സംസാരിക്കണം എന്നുള്ളവർ മാത്രം അൺമ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്ത് ചോദിക്കുക. പ്ലീസ് ഡു ദാറ്റ്. Rajendran sir, we will stop for the day. Thank you very much. You did a very remarkable job. Very impressive.
Sir, okay, sir.
Yes. So the next class will be tomorrow in Teams, and next session by Rajendran sir also will be in Teams. So good night to everybody, and thanks again to Dr. Rajendran.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.